Welcome, everyone. I am recording this live on Substack, so if you are watching there, feel free to say hello in the comments. And if you have any questions about this topic or anything else in the realm of migraine that you would like for me to address in a future episode, to the comments. I have that pulled open now so I can see it. And I'll continue to record these episodes here live to hopefully continue to build out our community here. And if you are listening to this as the audio podcast version, then you should be able to click the link in the description to subscribe here on Substack so you can join in the future. And all that's totally free. So, in today's episode, I'm going to be talking about breathing techniques for migraine relief. As you probably know, there are all sorts of breathing techniques and methods and protocols out there, from 4-6-7 to box breathing to alternate nostril to Wim Hof to holotropic to diaphragmatic to resonance breathing and on and on and on. And they all have their very precise numbers and instructions about when to breathe, how long and so forth, when to breathe through the nose or the mouth, using your diaphragm or your chest, and so on and so forth. And everyone claiming that their method is the best. So there's lots of extraordinary claims, but there's not always science or evidence that to go along with it. You might also have seen videos, I know I have, on social media of people swearing that a particular breathing technique gets rid of migraines every time for everyone. And you might have been a bit disappointed if you tried one of those for yourselves. You're, I wonder if the folks who make those posts actually have ever had a migraine before. So, as is usual these days, there is a mountain of information and misinformation to sift through. So, in this episode, we're going to try to break that down, talk about what the science and the research here actually says, try to separate the fact from fiction. And as you'll learn, it's an area where I think there's both wildly overstated claims, but also areas where there may be some real benefits. And I'm going to try to boil it down in the end to some simple guidelines that are based on the science, including, I think, what I would consider the most promising technique that's simple and has been shown to be just as good or better than the best preventative medications for migraine. And so I think something that everyone with migraines should have in their toolbox. Um, so to start, let's talk just a little bit about breathing, how it impacts our physiology, and why these different breathing techniques exist in the first place. So, breathing, not surprisingly, can influence our physiology in significant ways. Of course, it is essential for life because it brings in oxygen, which our cells need to generate energy, and it expels carbon dioxide, which is a byproduct of metabolism. So it's so important that we breathe all the time that it is controlled by a structure deep in our brain and happens automatically or involuntarily. However, we can also control it voluntarily if we want, including for certain potential benefits, and that's where all of these different techniques come in. And I think there are two main effects on our physiology from breathing that are relevant in this case. The first is how it impacts our autonomic nervous system, and that is comprised of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. And the sympathetic is our fight or flight response, and our parasympathetic is often called the rest and digest system. So they're kind of opposing and activate kind of different organ systems when they are on. You can kind of think of the sympathetic nervous system as the body's stress mode and parasympathetic as its relax mode. And I'll use those terms going forward. So when it comes to breathing, when we're inhaling, we're actually tipping the balance a little bit towards the sympathetic system, the stress mode. When we're exhaling, we're tipping the balance a little bit towards the parasympathetic or the relax mode. So you can influence the relative amounts of their activity by how much time you spend doing each of those things. So that's the first way breathing impacts our physiology that we could potentially use for benefit. The second is its influence on the concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood. So remember, uh, one of the reasons we breathe is to get rid of carbon dioxide. And generally, the slower our breathing rate, the higher our carbon dioxide levels build up. And one of the things that higher carbon dioxide levels does is it causes the blood vessels in the brain to dilate, whereas lower levels will cause them to constrict. So, why might these things be beneficial for those of us with migraines? Um, there are kind of two ways we might think about using breathing techniques. The first is to try to help to relieve an existing migraine. And it is biologically plausible that it could help to do that. And that's largely because we know that activation of our stress mode um, will enhance our perception of pain, while activation of the relax mode, the parasympathetic nervous system, will reduce it. So, in other words, the more relaxed you are, generally speaking, the less pain you'll feel. So, what that means is if I were to jab you in the toe with a stick, that exact same jab would be less painful if you are relaxed than if you aren't. And that's from a few different factors. One is that the actual pain signal itself that's generated from your toe, that nerve signal that's carried from your toe to your brain, is actually less intense when you are relaxed. And then once those signals arrive, your level of relaxation influences how they're perceived. Remember that pain is ultimately a sensation that's generated by our brain, right? It doesn't exist anywhere in our body. It exists in the circuits in the brain that give us that sensation. So, in the case of relaxation, both the pain signal itself and your perception of pain is reduced. On the other hand, when you are in stress mode, those pain signals are amplified. So, changing your breathing in ways that increase parasympathetic activity can help reduce pain levels through that particular effect. And when you hear people talk about using breathing techniques for migraine, it's almost always discussed for this particular purpose. So, for aborting an attack or reducing the intensity of a migraine. And while there are theoretical reasons why that could help, as I've just mentioned, there's actually not a lot of good data for using it for that purpose, for relief. Now, I will say that in my experience working with many thousands of people, I'd say that in general, some people find it somewhat helpful. So I would say, first, it's not a cure-all by any means. It seems to help some people more than others, and the impact of it seems to be greatest if it's done early. Um, and I'll talk about specific techniques to use here for that purpose in just a minute. So that's the first way we might use breathing to help with migraines, which is to relieve or lessen the intensity of a current attack. The second is it could potentially help is by reducing the amount of sympathetic arousal in our daily life, the amount of time we're in stress mode, which reduces the negative impact of psychological stress on our physiology. And as it turns out, this is actually the area where we do have some solid research that does show real benefit. As you may know, psychological stress is a major contributor to migraines. It is typically reported in surveys as the most common trigger. Um, but how does that work? How is it that psychological stress, things going on in our mind, can provoke a migraine? And the answer is that psychological stress often activates our physiologic stress response, right? The sympathetic nervous system, putting our body into stress mode. And Many of us these days in this modern world live in this state of kind of low sympathetic arousal because of the impact of psychological stress. And so, for many people today, the balance is kind of tipped in favor of the sympathetic nervous system or stress mode. So we're a little bit out of balance a lot of the time, and that we know contributes to many health issues, including migraines. And this is the mechanism by which psychological stress impairs health. And in essence, psychological stress, through its impact on sympathetic arousal, makes the brain more vulnerable to migraines. So that's how influencing this phenomenon could potentially help in reducing them. And there are really two ways that we can go about reducing the impact of stress on our health. One is to just reduce the amount of psychological stress that you experience. There are various ways you might go about that. The second is to reduce the impact of that psychological stress on your physiology. And that's where breathing techniques or breath work comes in. So, the way in which breathing techniques could help with prevention is by reducing the level of day to day sympathetic arousal, the amount of time physiologically that you're in stress mode. Uh, so, it's one way of reducing the impact of psychological stress on our body. Um, Furthermore, we also know that higher states of arousal, when you're in stress mode, it promotes central sensitization. And that refers to the phenomenon where your pain system becomes hypersensitive over time, more sensitive than it should be. And which is the reason why medications used for migraine relief cause you to have more migraines. It's through that phenomenon of central sensitization. And that particular phenomenon is amplified with chronic stress. So it is this use case for prevention where there's probably the most significant opportunity for many people. So I'll talk now about the specific techniques. As I said, there are a great many different methods and techniques out there, each with their various, very specific ratios and so forth. So I think it's helpful to start by breaking them into three groups according to what the goal of the technique is. The first group are techniques that are used to try to help you feel energized. So examples there would be things like Wim Hof, which you might have heard of. It got super popular in the recent decade. That's named for a particular person, Wim Hof, who kind of developed that breathing technique. A similar one is holotropic breathing. And these actually work by stressing the nervous system and activating arousal and the sympathetic nervous system. So, not something you'd want to do for migraine relief. Again, these are used for energizing. And for some people, those particular techniques may trigger migraines. So, they'd be for other use cases, but not for use and for our purposes for either relief or prevention. The second group are techniques that are used for immediate relaxation, right? You just want to relax in the moment. And the goal is to activate the parasympathetic nervous system to put you into the relaxed mode physiologically. And these are the techniques that you might deploy for lessening the pain of an attack. And examples there would be things like box breathing, 4-6-7 breathing, which is inhale for 4 seconds, pause for six, exhale for seven, alternate nostril breathing. And then the third group are techniques that are to help improve autonomic flexibility, basically improving your ability to recover from stress. So, for example, let's say something happens that irritates you and it activates your stress mode. So maybe somebody cuts you off in traffic, and what you want is for that physiological state, if it is kicked off, which is easy to happen, oftentimes automatic, you want that to be as short-lived as possible. One thing that determines how long your body is going to be in that state is how easily your nervous system can reset, how easily it can go back into balance after that balance has been disrupted. And what we know is that there are breathing techniques for training your autonomic nervous system over time so that it is able to recover better, reset quicker. And that means that the amount of time that you spend in parasympathetic dominance in the relaxed mode will increase relative to the time spent in stress mode, which is what you want. Um, and as I mentioned, this is an area where we do have some good evidence, both supporting the idea that these techniques can, number one, improve autonomic flexibility, which makes it easier for you to shift back into relaxed mode and making stress mode harder to trigger. And number two, importantly, help to prevent migraines. Um, and the technique that's been studied most for this purpose, with the best evidence, is called resonance breathing or coherence breathing. So, for example, in one 2015 study, they took people with migraines, had them perform daily resonance breathing for 10 weeks, and what they found was there was a 36% reduction compared to a control group. And other studies on this particular technique have found a similar effect size. And that size is comparable to the very best preventative medications, the numbers on those that we have. So, what does all that mean for those of us with migraines? What are the ways that we can use breathing techniques to help us tip the scales in our favor? Uh, so, first is for prevention. We'll start there. As I mentioned, the best evidence we have for using breathing techniques to help comes with a regular practice so that we retrain our autonomic nervous system. And the specific technique that has the best evidence is resonance breathing or coherence breathing. Um, in its full form, it is paired with heart rate variability monitoring, which is something I'll talk about in the future. But you can do it, you don't have to have it to do that and to get benefits from it. And the pattern that is most effective, or most often effective, is to simply breathe in for 5 seconds and breathe out for 5 seconds, slowly and smoothly. Um, Most people prefer to do that through their nose, as your mouth will get dry if you don't. But either will work just the same. It's the same effect physiologically. And that's it. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. You can also do 4 in or 4 out, but 5 and 5 is nice round numbers to remember. And that ends up working out to 6 breaths per minute, which is significantly less than our normal breathing rate, which varies from 12 to 20 typically when we're breathing involuntarily. Um, in the particular studies that have been done, which show benefit for migraine prevention, they typically have subjects do this for once a day for 10 to 20 minutes. So I mentioned one protocol, the one study did that over 10 weeks. Um, and again, that's been shown to retrain the autonomic nervous system to become more flexible, which means when it's tipped out of balance, it comes back into balance easier, and also harder for it to tip out of balance into stress mode. And you can measure that effect by tracking heart rate variability over time. So that's for prevention. The other category is for acute relief, and you can use this exact same technique of resonance breathing for acute relief because it accomplishes the same goal. Uh, and if you have been doing a regular practice of it, uh, like I said, 10 minutes a day or whatever, you'll likely get an extra boost when you do use it compared to other patterns you might try. So there might be an extra reason to use that particular one over the others. It's also nice and simple. But overall, when you are trying a breathing technique for migraine relief, you don't want to obsess too much about techniques or patterns, et cetera. First of all, just make your head hurt worse, and that's actually verified by the data. So, um, as I mentioned, all different patterns are just fundamentally accomplishing the same thing. All you're really trying to do is slow your breathing down to achieve that effect of increasing parasympathetic activity, and that's it. Um, and importantly, the studies actually show that if you have to focus on a specific pattern or the technique itself too much, it negates the pain relief benefits. So you want it to be kind of mindless. Um, so having to concentrate hard on specific numbers or what you're doing actually can undermine some of the pain relief benefits. And certainly that's an effect I think would be magnified in the midst of a migraine. So there's really no science to support anything fancier than that. So again, takeaways are try resonance breathing regularly for prevention. Again, that's 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. And the studies even anywhere from 10 to 20 minutes per day, uh, and which those studies show works as well as the leading prescription preventative medications, but is free of cost and free of side effects and comes with many other benefits. And then try resonance breathing or simply just breathing slow and smooth for acute relief when you're trying to diminish the pain during an attack. And if you find that helpful, for acute relief, keep it in your toolbox. If you don't worry about it. So, all in all, the answer here, I think, with regarding breathing techniques, whether they are help or hype, I'd say mostly hype when it comes to how they are commonly discussed, especially for migraine relief, and especially when it comes to the need for very specific protocols, one being necessary or better than the other. Um, but I'd say a definite help in terms of their role in migraine prevention, and that is for resonance breathing in particular, like I discussed. Um, and since this use case is often overlooked and neglected, you don't hear about it talked about too much. I think it's an area of opportunity for many. All right, so that's what I have to say about this topic. Again, if we'll be continuing to do these broadcast live on Substack and then post the recording on the podcast feed. So uh, you can click the link in the description if you're not part of the Substack community and join there for free. And thanks to those who did join live. You are welcome. Wendy says thank you. Yes, you're welcome, Anne. Awesome. Yeah, give it a try. I hope you find this helpful, and I would love to know your experiences with it. In fact, on the comments for this post, feel free to leave any questions about this topic or anything else you might be interested in me addressing in a future episode. Um, and I will take a look there. All right. Thank you guys for tuning in, and I hope to see you again soon. Have a great day.